everyone, Happy New Year to you all. I think I speak pretty much for everyone when I say that even though there were a few bright spots in 2020, for instance the start of a new console generation with the Xbox Series and PS5 consoles, for the most part, good riddance to bad rubbish, and 2020 was a lot of rubbish. Having said that, one way that 2020 was not a complete dumpster fire was the growth of this channel, Zilog and Moto. If you're a new viewer to Zilog and Moto, welcome, and I'm glad to see that you survived 2020 as well. Most of the Zilog and Moto content is a weekly look at English language Sega Master System, Genesis, SegaCD, and 32X libraries. And notice I said English language there, not a specific region, so I cover European or other region exclusive releases as well as just games that were released in the United States, which in the case of the Master System more than doubles the console library. There will be the occasional look at a Japanese release as well, but unfortunately I'm just not equipped to give those games the look they deserve, as at 41 years old I'm still trying to get a hold of just the English language. Before I get into some stats and top 10 lists, one question I'm sure some of you might be wondering is how I decide what games to review every week. Well, the short answer is it's completely random. So don't expect me to do a specific series of videos every week. The long answer is, well, it's not quite so random. The first restriction on what game I'm going to review in a particular week is whether I own it. Now, that might seem like a silly thing, but I've currently compiled a list of 1,273 games from the libraries of those four consoles, and right now I've only got about 751 of those. Believe it or not, trying to collect almost 1,325-year-old games in good condition takes a while. My goal is to pick up 100 a year for the next 5 years and really get things to where there's just a few hard-to-find ones that I can pick up when they're available. So we've established that I actually have to be in possession of the game, but then how do I decide which game to pick of those games that I have? Well, I've got a loose formula for it where every 4 weeks I pick 2 Genesis Mega Drive games, 1 Master System game, and then 1 either Sega CD or 32X game. This isn't a perfect ratio, but it's a good guideline to evenly work through each of the 4 libraries and not do too many from any one console. Then at that point I try to just make sure there's a good mix of games every week, like not doing sports games 3 weeks in a row, because no one wants to see that. And also, if there's a game that has a seasonal tie-in, I'll try to slot it in. For instance, like how this last season I reviewed Decap Attack for Halloween and Toe Jam and Earl for Christmas. And that's basically it, with one caveat, and that's series of games. I mention this because for the first time during Season 3 this year, I'll be starting to look at sequels or ports of games to other consoles for games that I've already reviewed. For instance, in about a month, in episode 102, I'll be reviewing the SegaCD version of Bill Walsh College Football. Well, assuming I have my SegaCD back in time, but that's a whole other issue entirely. Because the Genesis version was my second review ever, way back in episode 2. So expect to see a lot of those type of titles this year, maybe about a third of the schedule or so. But that's the future. Let's talk about the past season for a bit. During 2020, Zilog and Moto had some nice growth, and I just want to say I appreciate each and every one of you that's clicked on a video and given me a few minutes of your time, or possibly liked the channel enough to subscribe. And before I go any further, I know these numbers are relatively small in comparison to other channels, but due to that, they all mattered that much more to me. This year, Zilog and Moto saw almost 2,000 views, translating to 166 hours of view time, and added 61 new subscribers to the channel over the course of the year. These are huge increases in every category for 2019, and far more than I was hoping for, so to say I'm happy with that is a massive understatement. From a strictly views perspective, easily the top video of the year was episode 89 in Coffee Crisis, and if you told me before I uploaded that video that it would just blow everything else on the channel away, I would have been shocked, as well it's not that great a game, especially the Genesis version. In second place was Tommy Lasorda Baseball with just shy of 100 views. Then Quartet from episode 26 in season 1 still having some staying power. Full disclosure, I think somehow Quartet benefited from some weird glitch, as while it has a ton of views, the average time watched is very small. Rounding out the top 5 is Rastan from episode 75, and finally Astro Warrior from episode 90. As well as Coffee Crisis did a few months ago, the view champion for the channel is still episode 35, although that's cheating a little bit, as episode 35 was a look at the Genesis Mini and 2 games in Tetris and Darius. Okay, I'll give you a break from seeing my ugly mug for a bit. Let's do some top 10 lists. 4 of them, in fact. First, the worst 10 games looked at during the last 48 episodes, then the best 10 games of that same time period. And then we'll follow those up with the 10 worst games I've looked at so far for the entirety of Zilog and Moto, and then finally the 10 best in the history of the channel, before handing out some awards at the end. For the 10 worst games of Season 2, these first 6 all managed to earn at least 1 star, so you can kind of group this list into 2 parts, the bad and the putrid. For the merely just bad, we start at number 10 with the video we just looked at to close out 2020, Pac-Mania for the Master System. Bad sound can flat out ruin a game, and the rest of the game wasn't much better. Number 9 goes back to much earlier in the season, and I can still taste poorly drawn graphics and abysmal load times. The Adventures of Willie Beamish, a game that was okay on other platforms, but just couldn't get the job done on SegaCD. Number 8 goes to the most popular review of 2020 in Coffee Crisis, a game that admittedly had a pretty decent concept, but was ultimately limited by the platform and the experience level of the developers. Number 7 goes to Pit Fighter for the Genesis, yet another game that was just strangled by apparent budget constraints, as the Genesis was definitely capable of more. On the bright side, it was at least better than the horrific Super Nintendo port. Number 6 is the shameful Back to the Future 2 for the Master System, and I understand Back to the Future 2, the film, isn't quite as beloved as the original, but it still deserved a lot better than this. And at number 5, the last game to garner at least 1 star is Marksman Shooting for the Master System. I know it's technically paired with trap shooting, and maybe it wasn't designed to stand on its own, but regardless of how it was distributed, it's its own game, and it's a tech demo for the phaser at best. Now the games in 2020 that couldn't even muster a single star, the absolute bombs of the year. Number 4 is Andre Agassi Tennis, with no save function, not even a password, and horrid controls. Number 3 goes to Make My Video, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, which is a poor excuse of a game and a grainy mess that's just hard to look at. Number 2 is another recently reviewed non-game in Art Alive, a piece of creativity software with the inexcusable miss of no means to save your work. And finally, the worst game I reviewed in 2020, and a definite candidate for the all-time worst game from these 4 consoles, is Rise of the Robots for the Mega Drive. An impossible game that simply never should have been released anywhere. Okay, let's get off the negatives for a bit and start thinking more positively, and run down the 10 best games I reviewed in 2020 on Zilog and Moto. Number 10 is Lethal Enforcers for the Genesis, a game that I enjoyed far more than I expected to, and while it's not arcade perfect, it's still a great time for 1 or 2 players. Number 9 is the original Wonder Boy for the Master System, a game that's just a ton of fun, includes infinite continues, and beats the absolute shit out of Hudson's Adventure Island. Number 8 is Astro Warrior, truly the little shooter that could on the Master System that's shockingly ahead of its time, and looks and sounds far better than it has any right to. While those 3 games were good, the top 7 are in another tier, literally, as they all garnered 4-star reviews. Number 7 is ToeJam and Earl, and it really shows just how important originality is to a game. Number 6 is a game that if you'd asked me when I first played it 25 years ago, I'd have never rated it this high, and it shows the importance of knowing how to play a game, and that's Crewball. Number 5 is the faithful interpretation of the Capcom arcade classic, and one of the first games I ever played on the Genesis, Forgotten Worlds, and it was nice to see it hold up so well all these years later. Number 4 is the David Perry and Shiny classic Cool Spot that shows it's possible to make a good game around just about anything, including a soda mascot. Number 3 is Asterix, definitely the best Master System game I played this year, and an incredibly enjoyable effort all around. Number 2 is a game I had literally no expectations for, and really just played it because it was spooky for Halloween,
and it turned out to be possibly my best decision of the year in Decap Attack. And finally, at number 1, even though it's hard to complete without cheating, and I do mean hard, Xenocrysis for the Genesis is another one of those titles that just shouldn't exist, but does somehow, and should be considered a must-own for Genesis and Mega Drive fans. Ooh, okay, that was a lot. So, of course, let's run it back and now do the worst games I've had to put up with from the entire 96 episodes of Zilog and Moto. At number 10 is Coffee Crisis. Number 9 is Pit Fighter on the Genesis. Number 8 is the Great Waldo Search from Season 1, and a game that would insult the intelligence of even the 4-year-olds it's directed at. Number 7 is Back to the Future 2. Number 6 is Marksman Shooting. And number 5 is the only bomb-rated game from Season 1 in American Gladiators. Finally, the bottom 4 is unchanged from the 2020 list, with number 4 going to Andre Agassi Tennis, number 3 going to Make My Video, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, number 2 going to Art Alive, and finally, the worst game I've reviewed so far on Zilog and Moto, number 1 goes to Rise of the Robots. The best of Zilog and Moto so far changes things up a bit more than the worst of list, and we start at number 10 with Crew Ball, number 9 going to Forgotten Worlds, and number 8 going to the best EA Sports title I've looked at so far, NHL Hockey. Number 7 is another EA title, and it's another title that kicked off a legendary series in Road Rash. Number 6 goes to Cool Spot, number 5 to Asterix, and I'm sure what's going to be a controversial decision, number 4 goes to the original Phantasy Star on the Master System. Number 3 is Decap Attack, which means one title from Season 1 snuck into the top 2, and that's the recently released Darius, a completely valid reason to buy the Genesis Mini by itself. And finally, the best game I've had the pleasure of looking at from the first 2 years of Zilog and Moto is Xenocrysis. However, even as good as Xenocrysis is, it's only a 4-star game, so it's safe to say that something is going to come along and dethrone it from the top spot. The question is just if that's going to happen during Season 3 or not. We shall see in another 365 days.
Okay, now that those lists are out of the way, it's award time. So let's get right to it, and you might remember some of these awards from last year. First, the biggest disappointment of Season 2, which goes to Garfield Caught in the Act. This is a game that honestly isn't horrible, but it also was capable of so much more, and whether it was merely being caught in design hell or a victim of budget cuts, we clearly didn't get the game that was originally envisioned, surrounding possibly the biggest cartoon character in the world at that time. The flip side to that award is the biggest surprise of Season 2. And while I could see arguments here for Astro Warrior, Asterix, and Crew Ball, this has to go to Decap Attack. I literally had no expectations for Decap Attack, a game I had never played, but seen a million times in ads back in the day. No one talks about Decap Attack in 2020, and I have no clue why, as between its graphics and sound, it's clearly one of the best platformers on the Genesis. Vic Tokai definitely didn't get the credit they so richly deserved here. And finally, it's time for my favorite game of the year for each console. To be clear, this isn't the game that I think is the best, because you'd already know that based on my top 10 list. Instead, it's simply the game I had the most fun with for each console. I'm going to start with the 32X because I only got around to one 32X title this season due to technical problems. And that's Star Wars Arcade. Even though Star Wars Arcade is getting the award here by default, it's still a fun title, and I like how they tried to make up for it not being arcade perfect by adding in an extra extended game mode. Next, another console where I did less reviews than I'd originally planned, the SegaCD, and for the SegaCD, my favorite game of the year was Crime Patrol. Now yes, when the other two games are Willie Beamish and Marky Mark, Crime Patrol would have to be an absolute dog not to be my favorite this year. But even though it was frustrating at times and a royal pain to emulate for light gun access, I really enjoyed all the super cheesy Z-grade movie acting. I definitely recommend giving it a look if you've never played it and enjoy terrible FMV light gun games. The Master System is a console that inadvertently got more action this year due to the 32X and Sega CD issues, So I've got more to choose from here, and that makes this an incredibly tough choice. But I think my favorite Master System title this year was Dynamite Ducks. But I've got to give an honorable mention to Astro Warrior as well. About the only bad thing I can say about Dynamite Ducks is that it makes me angry it never got ported to the Genesis or the Mega Drive, which just seems like a huge miss, especially based on the Amiga and Atari ST versions. Last but not least, my favorite Genesis Mega Drive game of the year, and that goes to Crew Ball. I played Crew Ball a lot longer than I actually needed to for the review purposes in an effort to beat it, and even though I never quite got there, I had a lot of fun in the process. This probably would have been Xenocrysis if it wasn't so freaking hard, but I'm getting older, and I definitely don't get as much enjoyment from difficult games as probably younger people do. And there you have it. Another season of Zilog and Moto is in the books. It's hard to believe I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, and as much work as it is trying to play these games, capture footage, research, write scripts, read voiceovers, get in front of a camera, and edit it all together, it definitely has been rewarding, and I've got a great sense of accomplishment from it. As terrible a year as 2020 was, and it was bad, there definitely were some bright spots, like having the coffee crisis video blow up a little bit on Reddit, or having the privilege to have a guest spot on the St. Spacey's show, and I want to personally thank Brian for that. And definitely go check out St. Spacey's if you haven't already. He's a good egg, as it were. One last thing you may have noticed, or not, that I don't come out and ask people to subscribe every video. I know I probably should, as it does scientifically cause more people to subscribe, but I've just wanted people to subscribe that really enjoyed the product versus beating them over the head with it. And I don't say that to act like I'm better than other YouTubers in some way. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I respect the hustle and the self-promotion. It's just not how I want to do things. But having said that, I will ask this one time a year that if you like the videos, please subscribe. I'm currently at 78 subscribers, and I'd really like to break 100 this year so that maybe when conventions start up again, I can have that custom URL for putting on cards or flyers to hand out. And that's it. I'll end things now like I end every video, and let's really get the positive juices flowing for 2021. Remember, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other.